Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly video for tropical weather this week, April 5th, 2025. It is the first weekend of April and the first video update of April. And with that, we're now getting closer to the hurricane season. And now that we're getting closer to the hurricane season, we're starting to talk about it more in depth with predictions. And yes, you already know where I'm going with this week. Colorado State University came out with their prediction for this year's 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. We're going to go over that, and we're also going to go over some climate model data as well as what is going on currently with conditions in the Atlantic, and also a little bit of current United States weather, that in which there's a lot to talk about. So thanks for tuning in. Let's get started by going over the countdown as we stand as of Saturday, April 5th, till June 1st, when it will be the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. We are officially 57 days, so now under 60 days, so less than 2 months officially now, till hurricane season begins. And trust me, these next 2 months or less than 2 months will go by very, very quickly. And before you know it, it'll be June 1st and we'll be in hurricane season. And you definitely know that hurricane season is fast approaching because now we are now starting to talk about predictions. And more predictions are to come this upcoming week, and we'll talk about that once they come out. But this past week, on Thursday, Philip Klotzbach from Colorado State University released their prediction for the hurricane season, and they have a full document of what their prediction is and what they expect, in which I'll show you in just a moment. But here's just an outline of what their general prediction is. 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes and 4 majors, obviously with the average in a typical Atlantic hurricane season being 14 named storms, 7 threes. So slightly above normal season is what they generally expect. And the very interesting thing, of course, that I like to pay attention to is the accumulated cyclone energy, which generally indicates how much energy is being output by these storms this year. Surprisingly enough, an ACE value of 155, which is pretty decently above normal, or above the 123 ACE average. So pretty solidly above normal season they expect this year, and pretty decent intensity as well. And I'll show you why they show that, and if you want to check it out for yourself, they have their full forecast in a PDF, in which I'll link to the description below. But if not, if you want to search it up yourself, go to CSU Tropical Meteorology, and on the first page, on the first link that you search up on Google, it should take you to a page, and the link to this outlook should be on that page. So if you want to search it up, you could do that. Otherwise, I'll link this full outlook in the description box below. But here they have, once again, the predictions. And below that, they also have kind of a rundown of what they generally expect for this hurricane season. They even have kind of a table of predictors that they generally look at for the hurricane season. 3 main predictors, all of which are sea surface temperature and also kind of atmospheric patterns too. And 2 out of the 3 predictors for this year are strongly enhanced. So I guess that's a positive. But the main thing I want to take you down to is, if we scroll down a little bit, here it is, the analog forecasts, pretty much meaning years that they found most similar to this hurricane season. And I actually find this table very interestingly enough, because you can see here, so pretty much analogs, the years that they found that were most similar to this hurricane season in terms of at least what the expectations are, or at least, what the climate, what the setup might be. I found they have some pretty interesting years. One of them being, and if you are a hurricane tracker, you know this year very, very well, 2017, one of the analogs that they have in their forecast this year. But they also have years like 2008 and 1999, Both of these years too were also pretty active. Especially 2008, we had storms like Hurricane Ike and Gustav. And all of these years were pretty decently impact years, except 2006. That 2006, that was a not so active hurricane season. It was the year right after 2005, and it was pretty much completely dead. But even 2011, we had Hurricane Irene, which was a pretty significant, impactful storm, and generally the year was above normal as well. But multiple years on this analog list that were pretty significantly active, and not only were they pretty active, but they're also pretty infamous years as well. So it's very interesting to see these years pop up. Doesn't mean, the fact that we have 2017 on this list doesn't necessarily mean that this year will be like 2017. We will see a 2017 repeat with, Harvey, Irma, Maria, but generally interesting that this year is at least comparable to the factors that we have in 2017. So it's interesting to see whether or not Colorado State University has any merit. And we'll definitely see, because they have not only they have this April forecast that they released this past week, but let me just really quickly scroll down. Here we go. The forthcoming forecasts for the 2025 hurricane season. They have this outlook that they released for April. They're going to release another one in June, July, and August. So it'll be interesting to see if this forecast has any merit, and if maybe, things change between now and June, that, and also throughout the early season as well, that maybe they'll up these numbers or maybe downgrade them depending on how this hurricane season goes. But we have Colorado State University that came out this week. And also what came out today is the updated data from the Euro seasonal forecasts, including ENSO, and also it's a model, but they actually have their own data for potential activity in the Atlantic too. And the first thing I want to point out from the Euro seasonal, at least with their April forecasts, generally, they expect a warmer than average ENSO. Although if I were to kind of draw a mean, in terms of all these ensembles, which still extends, kind of has still a pretty wide range. Some of them showing, all the way from a pretty strong, potent El Nino this year, all the way down to, probably almost a La Nina. If I were to kind of draw an average with this ensemble mean, um, it's definitely warm. You could definitely see most of these plots are weighted warmer than normal, above the 0 degree line. So on the warmer side of ENSO, but it's not an overwhelmingly strong sign that we're going to have a super strong El Nino, which is something that I've really been trying to highlight over the last several weeks. Is, the talk of whether or not we're going to get an El Nino. Maybe we might, maybe we won't, but the models are really not entirely sold on it, which is why I'm really questioning it. And I mean, I should have done this, but honestly, if I were to compare this April forecast that the Euro came out with to the forecast from last month or even February, I think they've actually downtrended a little bit on potentially how warm they show the ENSO getting, in terms of how much of an El Nino we might get. Still warm nonetheless, so maybe there still might be some sort of suppressing factor, but especially once we get towards the August, September, October period, I mean, there's really a spread between maybe we might be in cooler neutral to maybe a quite decent El Nino, but the average really sits right around warm neutral to maybe a weak El Nino, maybe a weak El Nino. I guess that's might be where the ensemble mean is. And the bottom line I'm trying to say is that is not really crazy. That wouldn't be so bad, honestly, if we had a weak El Nino. It's not like we have a 2015 super El Nino that would just completely shut down the Atlantic and all the activity would be focused in the Pacific. But I guess if you were to, look at the actual forecast of what the conditions might be, this is the Euro seasonal, at least for the August, September, October period. You definitely see hints of that El Nino, because look at the Atlantic. Definitely a very different picture compared to the last several years. The Euro actually showing quite a dryish, not so active look in the Atlantic. And they do show generally more precipitation anomalies of higher value in the Pacific. So that's definitely an indication of warmer ENSO, more warmer waters in the Pacific, and that would definitely be a suppressing factor for the Atlantic. But interestingly enough, and I posted about this on Twitter, but I'm really, really skeptical of, despite this, the as I mentioned, the Euro does actually do, data releases on, their sort of simulation of how active they think each basin will be in terms of activity. And if you look at the latest release for April, I mean, all of this data is for the latest update as of April. Despite this, despite the fact that we have a warmer ENSO and generally a drier Atlantic, if you look at what the actual tropical storm forecast is by the Euro seasonal, they generally forecast, what is this, 15.8. So roughly around 16 named storms versus an average of 14 storms. That's generally the average for the Atlantic, and they forecast 16. So that's generally slightly above normal season that they forecast in the Atlantic versus the Pacific, both basins in the Eastern and the Western Pacific. And this is why I like to look at this map, because it actually shows both basins. Both basins, they show a near normal to slightly below normal season, despite the fact that we have a drier, not so favorable look in the Atlantic and a warmer ENSO in the Pacific, even if it's not an El Nino. Very, very interesting that they show this, and maybe that's a sign that there's a little bit more uncertainty about this hurricane season than what the model might be showing, and I've definitely highlighted that quite a bit over the last several weeks. So we'll see. This is April. Obviously, once again, we're now starting to get towards the time for where hurricane season, we're starting to talk a lot more in depth about hurricane season. We have Colorado State University, which released their forecast this past week. So we're definitely getting much closer to the time where hurricane season is becoming more relevant of something to talk about. But we're still only in April, early April. There's still lots of things to be ironed out, and definitely things can change between now and June. That'll make, whatever we expect for this hurricane season different. And I'll show you with the latest sea surface temperature anomalies right now in the Atlantic. Generally warmer, above normal. And in the Pacific, we have, a warmer spot in the Eastern Pacific, while we still have generally cooler. We're still hovering, I guess, around cooler neutral in the Pacific. We're definitely no longer at La Nina like we were earlier on in the year, but we're definitely not racing towards an El Nino. We still might get it, which is why I guess this Euro forecast for maybe a warmer neutral to weak El Nino might make sense for this year. But we're definitely not racing towards El Nino, and I'll show you in a little bit with the graph for the sea surface temperature anomalies and also the SOI why we're definitely not racing towards El Nino. But maybe part of the reason why the Euro is not so solid in terms of how it views the Atlantic, at least atmospherically. You do see that we kind of have these cooler anomalies in the Eastern Atlantic, especially off Africa. And that's definitely different compared to the last 2 or so years where the Atlantic MDR was really, really, really warm. And it's still very warm, especially through the Caribbean and the Gulf. Man, this is really above normal. Although the Gulf has generally been very much above normal for the last several years, and the Gulf will always be warm anyway for hurricane season. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, the Gulf is very much above normal, but it's likely that we're probably going to have an active Gulf anyways. It's just how it's been over the last several years. So really not surprising. But maybe this is why the Euro is not so sold on how things look like in the Atlantic. But once again, it's early April, and this could definitely change. And I'm pretty sure as we get into May and June, and pretty typical of the Atlantic that it maybe starts off colder, but especially as we head towards the summer, things significantly warm up in the Eastern Atlantic. Tends to happen, and it's generally the case that we've had over the last several years. But at least in terms of the Nino 3.4, in terms of how things are in the Pacific, this is definitely what's more relevant to me. Notice where we were in January. We're definitely not there. This was when we had still a very solid La Nina in place. This was, towards the beginning of this year in January and February. We definitely warmed up quite a bit since then. Especially as we started the beginning of last month, we warmed up quite a bit and went towards almost into warm ENSO territory. But since then, we've really crashed down with the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies. It's not like we're continuing this skyrocket and, racing towards a very strong El Nino in the Pacific. In general, yes, we've had warming since the beginning of the year. We're no longer in a La Nina, but especially that we're now getting into April, and we had some warming for a while, but it's cooled back down since, especially that we're getting into April. This definitely does not scream El Nino is coming, like a strong El Nino is coming at the top of your lungs. Once again, El Nino might still happen later this year, but we're definitely holding steady with a generally cooler ENSO, at least into the month of April. And I'll show you as well with the anomalies in the Pacific below the surface, the subsurface anomalies in the Pacific. And you could see from February into March, because this graph goes all the way out, this kind of animation goes all the way out from late January into late March. I think the last day is March 29th. You could definitely see we've eroded quite a bit of these cooler anomalies in the subsurface of the Pacific. Definitely, obviously, we're not on the same level as we were several weeks ago when we had a La Nina in place. But notice, especially, for a while, we had a lot of these warmer anomalies begin to appear in the far right corner, and this is near the surface of the Eastern Pacific. And that especially explains this huge warming that we had from February into the first half of last month. But notice, especially in the last several frames, that warms up and then it kind of erodes away. And in general, if you look at the subsurface of the Pacific, it's definitely not La Nina, but once again, just generally not very warm, not cold, not extremely cold, but it's also not very warm. And any warmth that we do have in the subsurface is still very much west of the 180-degree line, which is right here. So any warmth that we do have in the Pacific is still very much restricted to the Western Pacific. It's not like this is making its way, it's traveling eastward very quickly and, coming to the surface and trying to connect with whatever warmth we have in the Eastern Pacific as quick as possible. The bottom line is we're definitely not racing towards an El Nino, which is something I've really been highlighting over the last several weeks. And I also like to look at this with the SOI too. And I don't know what's happened with this website. Let's see, is this going to reload? Okay, yes. Now it's working. Don't know what happened earlier, but with the SOI too, and I like to look at the SOI, and I know I say this every week, but the SOI is just generally a measurement of the pressure patterns in the Pacific, and that has a huge part to do with ENSO. And especially if we have a positive SOI, that generally means that the pressure pattern in the Pacific is more in line with the La Nina. And if you look at the average, at least the line of the SOI over the last several weeks, notice especially from early to mid-March compared to where we are now, we saw a dip in the SOI heading into early March. Makes sense because we saw warming in the Pacific. But since then, the SOI has come back up, and the latest 30-day average now is at 10 points. So a solidly positive SOI, and a 90-day average still, so a longer term average of the SOI close to 7 points. So the SOI is definitely still solidly positive, and this is definitely not indicative of an El Nino coming very soon. If you want to see an El Nino come, you would definitely want to see this SOI drop very significantly and drop into the negative territory. That's when the atmosphere starts to respond a lot more like an El Nino. And we almost got there early last month, but we've since come back up. Bottom line, the atmosphere is really not responding like an El Nino. We're not even really close, if I'll be honest. once again, kind of cementing the idea once again that we're really not headed towards an El Nino, at least rapidly right now. And things can change between now and June. Um, we might not be headed towards an El Nino right now, but maybe next month that changes and we start to see more glaring signs of an El Nino. But usually by now, if we're not already starting to see the signs of an El Nino occur, which once again, I really don't see it. Um, El Nino might still happen this year, but usually if it doesn't start developing by now, it usually doesn't have a major impact on the hurricane season. And obviously that means pretty significant things, especially when you factor in the fact that probably, Colorado State University is seeing this, and they came out with a forecast this past week of an active hurricane season, and the fact that if we don't have any significant El Nino this hurricane season, it would certainly aid in that. So lots of interesting things to go over with the tropics, and we'll certainly monitor them very closely over the next several weeks, especially now that we're in the month of April. But also that we're in the month of April, we have lots to talk about when it comes to severe weather, and that's kind of what I want to spend the next several minutes, at least the closing minutes of this video, to kind of go over. There's lots to talk about when it comes to severe weather, not just in terms of actual severe weather, but flooding, and just all kinds of nuisance weather occurring over the United States right now, and has occurred for pretty much the entire week so far. We had a huge severe weather outbreak, I think, this past week around Wednesday or so. Really active. We had multiple damaging tornadoes, especially over portions of the central mid-south of the U.S. And now over some of those very same areas where we had very significant severe weather. Well, we have more severe weather ongoing still, but there's also lots of concerns with flooding and heavy rain, which is very much a nuisance within itself. And as you know, especially when it comes to flooding and severe weather, I always mention this, flooding and heavy rain tends to be the number one killer when it comes to tropical cyclones, not the wind. And in this case, tornadoes, yes, they're very damaging, but usually they only impact a select few people. It's very much dependent on, what street or what town you're in. But these flood warnings that you see that we have across the United States right now, extending all the way from the south, from Alabama, all the way from Texas and Oklahoma, up into the Appalachians, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Widespread areas of heavy rain, flash flooding, definitely going to be a nuisance for a lot of people. And of course, we have severe weather ongoing as well. Tornado watches in effect for portions of the south, from Texas all the way up into portions of the lower to mid Mississippi Valley, which has seen lots of severe weather over this past week. And then, interestingly enough, we have some winter weather advisories for portions of northwestern Texas and parts of New Mexico as well. So, quite a bit of mixed bag weather in the United States right now, but especially when it comes to the flooding and severe weather threat, it's a very huge issue, because today, at least in terms of severe weather, we have a moderate risk, at least by the Storm Prediction Center. The tornado risk is also pretty significant. We have up to a 15% chance, with the general scope of tornadoes extending all the way from the deep south and the Gulf Coast up into the Appalachians. So quite a significant area which has the potential for severe weather today. And we also have that hatched area too across portions of the south, from Texas up into Tennessee, and especially through the Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana region. And of course, we know this hatched area generally indicates where we could see significant tornadoes, of which we've had quite a bit over the last several days. So definitely, if you're in any of these risk areas, please keep an eye on weather conditions throughout the day today. There's also quite a significant chance for wind, up to a 45% chance for significant wind, and also a hatched area where we might see very strong wind gusts, maybe hurricane force, and then hail as well is also a significant issue. So all three levels of severe weather, very significant, and not maxed out, but of a very high chance today. And it continues into tomorrow as well, although much less, but still a non-insignificant severe weather, a slight risk over portions of the southeast and the Gulf Coast. And that lasts into day 3 as well, although only a marginal risk for portions along the southeast coast from Florida up into North Carolina. And then hopefully, at least as we head into the next week, um, unlike last week where we had multiple of these day 4 to 8 ranges, these day 4 to 8 outlooks by the Storm Prediction Center that had highlights for severe weather as high as 30% last week heading into this week. So far, we don't have that for later this week as we head into next week. So hopefully, severe weather will quiet down quite a bit next week. Definitely much needed, especially given how much we have of it going now. But certainly, lots of people being impacted now, and I'll show you with the satellite imagery. You can definitely see where a majority of the weather is. Once again, extending all the way from Texas, and really inclement weather extends all the way from the south up into the northeast today. If you're not getting severe weather, you're definitely getting some rain up into the northeast, but especially across the south. Look at how, all this deep convective activity we have over especially Texas into Arkansas and into the mid to lower Mississippi Valley. And this is going to create the threat not only for lots of severe weather and potentially more tornadoes tonight, but once again, lots and lots of rain, lots of which has already fallen. We've already gotten multiple areas across portions of the Mid-South and into the southeastern Midwest region, especially over portions of Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, generally around the Mid-South. Already seen areas where we've had rainfall totals upwards of a foot of rain in many areas. And once again, we still have many areas across this entire central eastern, central mid-south part of the United States under flood watches and flash flood warnings in effect. And you could definitely see lots of convective activity going to lead to lots of severe weather and lots of rain. A lot of it which is still yet to fall. This is the next 7 days by the Weather Prediction Center. Already lots of rain has fallen over portions of the mid to lower Mississippi Valley over the mid-south. But there's still more rain to fall. Some areas still could see as much as 5 inches over the next week of rainfall. Already on top of many areas that, once again, I've said have already received as much as a foot of rain, if not more. This is definitely going to create the risk for lots of flash flooding, and in fact, the day 1 risk for excessive rainfall, especially over portions of Arkansas, portions of Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and northwestern Mississippi, a high risk for excessive rainfall. So lots in the way of flooding and heavy rain, and just in general, severe weather, which is still going to continue into the weekend. But hopefully, once again, as we head into early next week, it clears out and things are a lot more quieter when it comes to the severe weather department. But I'm definitely sure that we're probably going to have more severe weather beyond that. Once again, since we're in the month of April, and then obviously once we get past the severe weather season and as we get towards May and June, we'll start worrying a lot more about hurricane season. I mean, we'll already start talking about hurricane season a lot more, given now that we have predictions coming out. But yeah, weather's getting active. Weather's active now, and it's probably going to stay that way in general over the next several weeks, especially as we still have severe weather season to talk about with April. I mean, severe weather season in general peaks April and May, and then obviously once we get past that, we get into June and we get into hurricane season. So quite an active calendar of weather to start talking about over the next several weeks, and we'll certainly do that for sure. With that being said, though, not much else going on to talk about today. Although we'll certainly update you throughout the week if there's any thing when it comes to severe weather that might potentially pop up. I'll definitely update you on that, not only on YouTube but on Twitter as well. And once again, if you are not following me on Twitter yet, That's really the place to be, honestly, Twitter or X or whatever the name is. If you want to get information on anything that is happening currently, I post on Twitter quite a bit. Not just about, current weather, but also when it comes to hurricane season, and I'll post a lot more about hurricane season. And definitely throughout the hurricane season, I'll be posting a lot on Twitter or X. So make sure to follow me there. Also follow me on YouTube. Like, comments, and especially subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you can get whenever I upload videos the moment I upload them. And with that being said, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And we will talk again soon.